just stop writing now. Okay. All right, you'll be glad to know we've come to the end. The first thing we want to do is just sort of review what we've done. I did an earlier review, so I won't go over the same material again. You all know what we did for the last couple of days. What we've done today is use this particular software to look at latent prints. So we've tried as best as we can to simulate some real cases. Clearly, as you're going to tell me, they're not quite as good as they could be. They're not real simulations. And unfortunately, you've had a limited amount of time to look at them. So I'm going to take that into account when I start asking a lot of questions about how you feel about this. What I'm going to do is try and get us to have a bit of discussion about some of the value that we would put on this and some of the concerns. So if I sort of kick the discussion off, accepting that we've already said this is first generation software and we know it has some limitations and some bits that are missing, the dots, before anyone points out dots to me again. As it stands, do you believe that it has any value to the fingerprint comparison process? Can you see that this software, as it stands, would help you in any way? And if so, what sort of way would it help you? Anybody like to kick in with the first idea? It's going to be a very slow discussion if nobody talks. I'll start picking on people. Greg. Oh.
It's used as a tool to support an identification. So when you have a very high ratio on that it would support the concept of uniqueness to the point of exclusion of all others. If you have such a large population that it would exclude everyone else by having a high number. I don't see, though, as a good tool for using it for low-value latents and stuff. I think that's a dangerous territory. I think it's kind of a scary thing for me to think about.
So as a support tool to help move towards individualization, you can see that there's a potential.
Very supportive, yes.
Yeah. But in terms of qualified reporting and going to these low, you're not too keen on that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. What about anyone else?
I agree with what Greg's saying, but I also agree that it's a good tool to start opening up discussion about the probabilities within our field. So I think it's, as an introductory thing, I think the low quality images we'd have difficulty, and it could even add more challenges in courts on that type of thing. But I think with good training and good ongoing use, I think that the field could very much benefit by it.
Okay. So Greg, that concern, is that around this? How would I get that evidence in court, that qualified evidence, and how easily would be? Is that where the concern is?
No, I think you're over dangerous territory with the lower probability ones. That
right.
It's pushing the envelope too much. I think that.
Okay. My egg in the pudding.
Yes, egg in the pudding.
What about anyone else? What's somebody over this side? What do they think? They think that's agree with that, or?
I can see the benefits on what we're considering borderline prints now, and that it could give some evidentiary value to what right now we're putting in the non-comparable stack or the non-identifiable stack. And now we're having some probability that it does have some evidentiary value.
Yeah.
Instead of just casting out altogether. And again, I'll go back, it can add to that stack of hairs and fibers and footwear that says, yeah, this guy could have been involved.
Yeah. Okay. Any other views around that, around its use? Or is that, can I summarize that as a general opinion of the students here, is that as a supportive tool, you see a potential of going stronger that? Is that generally accepted? Yeah. As moving in a sort of qualified reporting, the possible maybes, the strong, that's sort of generally, well, I'm a little bit more concerned about that. That sort of fair? Okay. In which case, what would we need to do? What would you like to see happen? If we take to make you, what would make you feel more comfortable about qualified reporting? What is it that, can you identify what it is that makes you uncomfortable about that? I mean, we have one mentioned already, which is this, how easy it might be to attack it in court. Is there any other sort of concerns around that?
Somebody else to break the ice on it.
Right. So it's
You don't
okay.
want to be the first.
It's okay if it's not me. Yeah. Would you have that NIMBY phrase over here? You know, not in my backyard. Yeah. Anybody got any other sort of feelings they might have? Yeah.
Well, I think for me, the way I was trained, it either is or isn't. It's suitable to identify or it's not at all. So this middle of the road, one of the questions was, would moderately support the real issue with moderate? What does that
Right.
mean? I could only see using it right now as I stand after I've already made the identification as a support in court to say. In addition, I also have this kind of statistics backing it up.
Okay. So yeah, and that's quite valid. It's actually moving against what we've always been trained to do. Yeah.
I think it's going to create, if we use the verbal scale as it's presented, while the academic and scientific community will understand what is meant by strong, a very strong probability, juries and the average person, it flies in the face of everything they've ever been taught. Jurors want to know the truth. They don't want to know there's a good chance.
Okay. Okay.
And I think educating the jurors is going to create a great obstacle to say, well, that really means it's him.
Mm.
They're going to hear, well, there's a strong chance it's him. Juries don't want chances.
Right. Any other comments?
I think sometimes, though, as fingerprint examiners, we take too much responsibility on ourselves to how the jury is going to interpret things. At some point, you have to trust that the jury is going to understand if you're giving proper explanations what you're saying. And we take on a lot of personal responsibility in not wanting to give these probable, moderate type of answers when maybe in combination with other evidence in the case, it's very valuable evidence. And are we keeping information from the jury that maybe they need to have? That's where I see the value in giving that type of evidence.
Well, it's the same with me. I wouldn't want to tell an officer or detective, this is a strong probability that this person has sent him out and say, okay, then he go chasing this person and, dragging them in, arresting them on a probability, not actually knowing, okay, this is the right person.
Okay.
I'd be more concerned about the officers misinterpreting what I'm telling them than I would the
Right.
jury.
Yeah.
The
I want to come back on that.
jury, we owe it not to the juries necessarily for explanation, but the defendants deserve the best possible and the strongest possible evidence. And our whole system is founded on that 100 guilty people go free before one innocent person goes to jail.
It's something we very briefly touched on, actually, I think yesterday. And we've talked very much in terms of using this in terms of evidence and in terms of a prosecution scenario. Okay, but don't forget that some of those inconclusives that you throw away and give no evidence, then it's possible that with this tool you might show that inconclusive belonged to the victim or belonged to another individual. So it is possible to think of scenarios where this is actually going to help the defendant. It's not always about prosecution. So off my head, I can't construct a very good one. Give me time. But it is possible to think of scenarios where it would work both ways, because this is certainly not just all directed in one area. So that's that. Sorry,
It gives us an opportunity to go back to those borderline prints that we would report as no value for identification. If we're looking at those as probability, it could also eliminate that defendant, as well as including it. I mean, so
That's very true.
It'd still be both sides of the fence.
yeah,
here, but
that's very
that
true.
could go
If you've
either
got
way.
this low feature latent and you've got this particular suspect, they've already arrested, they've charged him with that offence and whatever, and when you look at it, you're saying, well, actually this really bad latent could have come from lots of people. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily him, but it does sort of provide another piece of information for that thing. Yeah.
We're looking at that level of like print. If he's all worlds and you've got an arch, you've eliminated.
Yeah.
There you go.
Where instead of just saying it's a non-identifiable print.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's-
it's
it's-
eliminated.
You've helped both the prosecution and the defense.
No, that's right. I think the point there is that it's the same thing. You could use it in terms of that. Okay. So I think, but what I heard is, it sort of summarized, there are two things there. One was training, which is, okay, none of us have really been trained in this. We've all been brought up in this identification duality. It is or it isn't. So for us as a profession, I'd be right in saying that there's quite an educational program here, isn't there, to understand that maybe life isn't like that, that maybe life could be a little bit more complex. I do like to make life for everyone just a little bit harder, but it could be that that is something, and probably if we ever move forward with this, that's what would have to happen. So we would have to educate. And the second one is this sort of education of everyone else in the criminal justice system. And that's quite an interesting thing. How well informed are most people in the criminal justice system about fingerprint examination? Poorly, yeah. So it's not like we're even starting from here, is it? We're starting from back there. And that's quite an interesting thing that, and I'd had discussions out of class with a couple about that how can we change that view, which we need to do. So those jurors who didn't understand probability probably don't really understand what we do anyway. They understand it's him, because that's simple. They might not really understand how we got to it's him.
That's why I like the number thing, the probability being attached to it. Not as it is now, maybe down the road, because we're still talking about databases and all of that. I just hope that the numbers don't get lost and have no meaning.
Right.
The numbers, see, I think presenting it in a numbers rather than a verbal scale means more to a juror.
You see, that's really interesting to me, because we introduced the verbal scale here. And in fact, we didn't use it very much, but we introduced it, and I sort of suggested I thought that was a good idea. I'm actually now getting quite a consistent message back from my colleagues that says, actually, no, I think numbers are easier to understand. Which is
easier for the jurors to understand.
Which is just goes to show what I said before. It's not I shouldn't be the one to decide. And secondly, that's interesting. Yeah, the jurors could understand the
If you
numbers.
tell a juror there's a strong correlation, they hear one thing.
Yeah,
If you tell them there's a 1 in a million chance of somebody else, they hear something else.
yeah, yeah,
Because
Yeah.
there's no difference between a 1 under the verbal scales. There's no difference between 1 in a million and 1 in 100 million,
Mm.
or 1 in a trillion. But if you tell a juror there's a 1 in a trillion chance, he does understand that size numbers because he sees what the government budgets are. You know, a trillion, $1 million isn't what it used to be. And if people understand that 64, you know, they win a $64 million lottery.
yeah.
So they're used to those numbers. People are
Yeah.
more number centric than a verbal scale, which is open to total interpretation.
Yeah. Okay, and that's very interesting. I like that, and I think now I'm adding sort of three things in my head. We've got this training, we've got this education thing, but then we've also got this whole how do we explain it, which sort of feeds into both of those, and that's quite interesting about numbers. One of the issues with numbers, though, and you did it there, is that, you know, a probability of well, actually, you didn't do it, to be fair, but you got when you got a probability of 1 in a million or whatever, a misconception often is, well, if I have 2 million, it's going to happen twice. If I have 3 million, it's going to happen 3 times, and it doesn't mean that it's a chance of it happening. That's all it is a chance of it happening. So that's where I worry a bit about the numbers. That if I give a number like that, but of course, we're not going to give a probability anyway with this software. We're going to give a likelihood ratio, which gets around that because it's so many more times more likely to be. Okay, so that's really good, actually, and we're probably getting close. Looking at first generation software again, and we sort of touched on this before. So what is really missing? What if I came here and I got my big dollar checkbook open and I was just going to do my next bit of research on this, to make it better, to make it more useful as a support tool, what is actually missing?
Joints, palms.
Yep.
Third level detail.
I think we got to get level 2 out of the way before we put level 3 in.
So DOTS is going to be up there. Yeah.
Hopefully.
DOTS and Cyprian Ridges. Okay. So if you were going to bring this software and use it in your own labs, what would be the top thing? What would be the most important addition to this? Because I'm all assuming you're going to use this one anyway.
Joints and palms.
Joints and palms is going to be.
Because we do so much palm work.
Yeah.
And if you were able to present the end joint of a finger probability, the prosecution and the defense are also going, well, why can't you do that for the palm? And once you open that door, you're going to have to be able to do it for every print that's out there.
Okay, yeah, I see the point, and we're back to Pandora's box again.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is the thing, but I think there's another thing that comes in here, and again, a few of us have talked about this before, is about that communication as a fingerprint profession. Why can't you do it for palms? Because my software doesn't do it for palms. Why doesn't it do it for palms? Because we haven't developed that software. Why haven't you done it yet? Because we haven't got the money to develop it. You know, they can all be answered. That if you think about a defense, he's not going to go anywhere with that, because you're giving very logical answers. You know, I'm a state lab, we don't have the funding, you know. Yeah, I could develop palms for you tomorrow, but your taxes are going to go up. Probably not a good answer. But, you know, so some of those things. And for me, there's another thing that comes out of this, which is partly that education, but there's another bit to that education, which is about us being the profession, the expert, the person who knows about this, and standing up to those questions. Do people see what I'm saying there? That it's very easy to say, well, that's going to be really, really easy to challenge, blah, blah, blah. What we need to do is weigh the balance. I can't remember who I was speaking to. Someone was saying that logically it's like, okay, here's a new tool. What will this new tool give me? And we're sort of in that area now. Okay, this is what it's going to give me. It's not enough. I'm not going to do anything with it. Or, yeah, I really want to use this. Now consider what the challenges are and how I deal with those challenges. And if I can deal with 80% of the challenges, then I can sort of move forward. If I can't deal with 80% of the challenges, then I'm going to have to go away and think about it again. That's sort of a logical thing.
Part of the issue I see is that, for myself, the database that you're using is fairly small. And so, because I'm not a statistician, and because most people in the profession are not statisticians, being able to educate myself as to why the database that you're using is functional, I can hear what you're saying and I can understand that, but because I don't have the education behind me, and people that are going to be listening to it also don't, we have to throw out those, what is this, where is this validated from? And you're dealing with, what, 120,000 prints? To me, that's a significantly low number in the whole grand scheme of things. So the education, to be able to educate jurors, to be able to educate the criminal justice system, I think the defense is going to be more educated in a lot of this stuff than the prosecution is. So we as experts have to be the ones to educate our prosecution.
Yeah, absolutely right. But remember, one thing we did here is I all made you assume that this was all okay, and said, let's not worry about validation, let's not talk about it. Well, now we're going to start talking about it. And that is the validation. So my expectation is that when this software is available to use in casework, what I will have is a published, peer-reviewed document that the best statisticians in the world have all looked at and all commented on, that says your database is the right size. So we will have that, but there is still a gap between that, isn't it? Because I've got a statistician over here telling me that that's exactly the right size, you can rely on it. Even for myself, how does that, what brings me the confidence there?
Yeah, but you're going to have other statisticians on the other side
Saying,
challenge that.
"That's
because
too small."
the way science is.
Yeah. And of course that would have whatever size the database is.
I'd like to go into court and tell the jury that, say, okay, our population in our community area is 2 million people, people coming and going, and that this exceeds the number of people that are even in our community that could potentially be suspects. It may multiply that several times, so it's so astronomical that they go, well, then it has to be this person because it far exceeds anybody that can be a suspect in this area.
Okay, again with those, I won't go into this, but this idea of having databases larger than population size, it doesn't necessarily follow in a sort of mathematical, logical way. But I see the point from a juror's point of view, it does, and that gives confidence. So there's another thing there is that database size. We've got to do two things, haven't we? Either increase it, or probably both, increase it and provide some substantive proof that that's the right size.
Or perhaps instead of just increasing it, regionalize it. where you take sampling from various parts of the world and have a database to show that the database is valid no matter what the ethnic or database is.
Okay, that's just like a separate issue. So the first issue is the size of what you can have in your database, and then the second issue is the ethnicity type thing. And that's a simpler one to deal with in some respects, because that's going to be research. Simple research is going to show either that distribution of minutiae is the same throughout all races, or that there is some variation in certain places, and that will just happen. But obviously, with the number of ethnic groups that we have, that will just sort of follow on with time.
I think the biggest thing is the education, that being able to educate practitioners to have a belief that that is a good enough sampling in order to get accurate predictions.
Okay.
Likelihood ratios.
So we talked about, it's interesting because we singled out things like the database and stuff, which is very valid to sort of look at. But the basic concept of using a statistical model, am I right in thinking everyone's actually fairly quite okay with that, comfortable with that idea? Yeah. Which is really cool, because a few years ago that would not have been the case. So that's quite good. So that means that something's happened. So yeah, now what I've got in my head is this idea of the training, this idea of providing the right validation to show that these things work. There's some bits missing off our model, which we know. We've got a model as a first generation, just as it is now, that we can see does have a bit of a supportive role. And that's quite important, that first one, because remember I talked about my circle, unless we can start using it in some way now to sort of tease out the problems, it's difficult to see where you go to the next stage. Okay, what about impact? We'll go back to that qualified reporting again, not because I'm necessarily trying to sell it to you, but more in terms of, everyone was a little uncomfortable with qualified reporting. But if I was to suggest that with a more extensive training, with more use of the statistical models, with more understanding of where those statistics come from and what the various likelihood ratios are, if you were much more comfortable with that, bear in mind you've had a few hours. So if we assume, would that still be a problem to report in a qualified manner?
It's hard to know without that knowledge.
Hard to know. Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? In fact, nobody's going to answer it, so it must be a difficult question.
Well, I mean, I'm much more comfortable with in just this short period of time, I'm much more comfortable with the idea of probability.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that with more knowledge, you would be more comfortable with it. But you can't answer.
Yeah, I suppose I'll answer it in a different way. What I was trying to say, is there a fundamental belief that we should not move away from individualization duality? Is there anyone who believes that regardless of how well trained, how understanding, how well validated statistical models is, that for a reason we should always stick to individualization and non-ident? Anybody sort of think?
That's the safe bet.
Yeah, it's definitely a safe place.
You were talking about that a few years ago this wouldn't have been acceptable. A few years ago it was also not acceptable to have an inconclusive determination.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Moving that you can say, I can't answer that, was the first step to opening the door to probability, actually. Because as long as it was either, the only options that the examiners had was it is or it isn't, not I can't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That is
What's
the
that
first
open
step
the
along the
door for
way.
it?
What's keeping us from having both the individualization and the probability factor on those borderline prints?
Exactly.
We've already got the individualization.
Yep.
And I think that's fairly well based.
Yep.
And the probability just adds to those borderline prints.
So-
What's the difference in a statistical model as far as a partial identity than what some examiners currently do today and say he cannot be eliminated?
Well, it's all about that grading thing. It's, if you say cannot be eliminated, you're saying, well, if you're saying there's a strong likelihood, or it's just,
Same thing.
yeah, in a sense, one is a generalization and the other one is just being a little bit more specific. Then we talked about, how inconclusive is inconclusive, really. That's what you're doing. You're just putting a little bit more information in there. But what I was trying to get at was, is there a fundamental thing that says, as representatives of our profession, we should never ever consider it? Yeah, lots of hits, lots of ticks in the boxes to do before we consider doing it, the training and validation and everything. But there isn't sort of like an underlying thing of we should never do it. Nobody. And again, that's quite other groups, they would say that. They would say, no, stick where we are. It's safe. Everyone understands where we are. And I find that quite, I think that's quite good for, well, it's good for me, isn't it? That's quite good in a sense that we're open of mind enough to say, okay, let's really look at this and see what we can do. Okay, having said that, and just sort of taking it back a bit, what do you think the next thing you'd like to see happen? So the next time Paul Chamberlain pops up in the United States, what would you like me to be able to say? Is it something like a new development? Is it to show you how it's being validated and do that? Is it you need validation? Let me finish. I'm at the end of my list. Is it that you'd like to see more training in probability so you understand the probability more? Which bit is it that's most valuable to you, do you think, is the next step?
It doesn't matter if
I
you
think
understand
the training-
probabilities, it's not valid.
It's not that.
And completing the model.
So if I come back in a in a few years' time, if I come back in a year's time and say, hey, I'm going to give you now the full detail of how we validated, show how this works, who's signed off. That's sort of the next bit you want to see, yeah? And then something like giving you more in-depth training in probability and filling some of the gaps in is probably, a quick second, probably along with the other bits coming in at the same time.
There are other sources to learn probability beyond in a fingerprint environment.
There are, and in fact, that's interesting. You can go and do statistical courses. Remember, though, there's a slight difference. You go and do most statistic courses, you'll end up doing mean distributions and chi-squareds and things like this, which is all very interesting stuff and is relevant to a certain extent, but is a little bit off the mark. If you want to do something about forensic probability, that's a little bit difficult to find courses that tailor around that. They do exist. That's for certain, and it's not like they don't exist, but they're not quite so common. But one that then they might tend to concentrate a bit more on DNA and those sort of things. So what I'm thinking is if you could tailor something and put something together that was, specifically in that fingerprint area. Yeah, but it's the validation, that's the one that's coming out on top. Okay, that's really useful stuff, guys. I'm now going to ask you, what about this course? Did you find this course valuable?
Yes.
Okay, you can be polite. I know we're being filmed.
No.
So you found this valuable. What particularly was useful in this course? What can you think like one thing that you thought, yeah, that was worth coming for 2 days?
Possibility that this has.
Possibility it has,
Mhm.
yeah. Sorry?
Potential.
The potential.
I think it was nice coming into this course. I had heard discussion about probabilities. Okay, now you're getting away from being 100% sure, and now it's going to be, well, I'm 60% or 80%. It's kind of nice that it wasn't presented that way.
Right.
So, definitely the possibility that it has.
Okay.
Well, and I've seen this before, and I thought, oh no, what new thing are they going to have us buy? It's not going to be useful anymore. So,
You're not trying.
yeah. But it
Yeah.
changed my mind. It wasn't like that at all.
That's really good. I really appreciate it.
But they pushing so much for numbers. Everybody wants numbers. It's on the DNA. They throw out those numbers and people just okay, that's it. But if we get out of our comfort zone, and I think that's what you're trying to get us old heads to do.
No, just you.
To step out of our comfort zone and just, look at other alternatives to, dismissing, possibly, or leaving, so forth.
Exactly that. I mean, when we started this course and we explained what it's about, this was the idea. Give you some basic information, give you the tool, let you look at the tool, and what I want you to do is sort of try and think of how I might use this and whether it's beneficial. What you've come back and said is yeah, okay, I can see it's in a support role. Well, that's good because I was talking about it in a support role. You can see the potential for other things around it, but you have some reservations. And in fact, most of those reservations I'd sort of hinted at myself in the presentation. So that's really sort of powerful for me because that's exactly, I've got you where I want you to be. So I'm a little bit hurt that nobody said they came along to this course because they wanted to see me, but you know, that's sort of understandable. Okay, so that's sort of what I wanted to do. What did anybody else like to say? It'd be nice if other people got some other comments to say, particularly ones about what a great instructor I am. And not to forget Sarah, of course. You know, what a wonderful instructor Sarah is, because we can take this film and send it to our bosses. That'd be cool.
Sarah was a great help.
Yeah, I'll pay you later. No, Sarah was a great help. I couldn't have done this without Sarah, because you know, she's an essential part of the team and my boss.
I found the explanations of when we were doing the practicals and seeing your interpretation of those was quite helpful to understand the process a little more.
Very non-threatening environment to do what we needed to get done. Or not.
Oh, yeah. Okay, anybody else got any other comments they'd like to make? It's fair we turn the camera off and the comments go. What we really meant to say was.
It was a very beneficial class, and it was nice to see something that's new, a new concept that seems to blend well with our entire field. You know, it's not so many things come in and it's so contrary to what our beliefs and things like that. Like it's been nice to see the entire field going in this kind of a direction.
If we're not willing to change and move forward, we'd still be out there using lamp black and anhydrous from 70 years ago. We've got to be able to move forward.
Yeah. And that's, and I'll just finish on that. And the interesting thing about this, that initially this course was actually called The Evolution of Food. That was the original title I gave to the course. I don't know where I dropped it, but that was the initial thing, and it's exactly that, you know, about adopting new ideas. So unless anybody else has got anything else they'd like to say, I'd just like to express my thanks and Sarah's thanks. You've been an excellent class. I really enjoyed these 2 days, even with the cameras. And I hope and know that I'll see you all again very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.